What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all doing well, and thanks so much for clicking here on another video. As usual, I always appreciate it. And today we're going to be talking about the latest Disney live-action remake of a 2002 classic, one of my favorites, and this one is called Lilo and Stitch. Directed by Dean Fleischer Camp, this film stars people like Maia, Kealoha, Sydney Elizabeth Agudong, Chris Sanders once again as the character of Stitch, Zach Galifianakis, and many more. And before we get too far into this video, if you guys are a fan of early reviews like this, as well as retrospective reviews, live streams, the occasional vlog, all sorts of fun movie-related content, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing. But if you're a returning viewer, I always appreciate it. And as I already said, we're talking about the new live-action remake of Lilo and Stitch. Now, when this was announced, I was incredibly excited, but also hesitant. The live-action remakes have been a bit of a mixed bag in the last few years. I've been far more of a positive individual around these films, though, over the course of the last decade and some change since we've been getting the live-action remakes. I was definitely a bigger advocate for them in the earlier years of them being made, but in recent years, especially with some of them going straight to Disney Plus, the quality has been a little bit all over the place, and I think a lot of people in general would say that that's been the case with majority of them. So here we are now, just a few months shy of Snow White, which was completely panned by so many, even though I honestly didn't think it was nearly as bad as people had to say. It wasn't great, but it definitely wasn't a terrible time. But here we are talking about one of my favorite films, a film that came out in 2002. I actually have Stitch tattooed on my leg. So without further ado, let's get into what this film is about, in case those of you who are watching this don't know what Lilo and Stitch is all about, and then we'll get into my thoughts on this remake. Lilo and Stitch 2025 reimagines the beloved 2000 animated classic. The story follows Lilo, a young Hawaiian girl grappling with the loss of her parents, and her older sister Nani, who becomes her guardian. Their lives take a turn though when Lilo adopts Stitch, a genetically engineered alien fugitive, and together they navigate themes of family, belonging, and healing. I'll start this off immediately by saying that, like I already mentioned, the first one is just a classic to me. The Lilo and Stitch franchise in general has had several movies now, with the original being, I believe, the only theatrically released film, and it would lead on to having a TV show on Disney Channel that I watched plenty of as a kid. There's also been multiple video games, and just the overall branding around Stitch has been pretty big. So when I heard this movie was coming out, I was worried they weren't going to get Stitch right, but I'm happy to say that Chris Sanders returns as the role. He also directed the original film, but he comes back to play Stitch once again, and they maintain the look of the character. So immediately, I knew I was at least going to feel at home with the fact that Stitch was going to look and feel like Stitch. Now, another big part of that is the other title character, which is Lilo, who in this one is played by Maia Kealoha, who is actually, this is the first time she's ever been in anything. This is her first acting role in any big way, and I thought she was really great. I thought she captured the spirit of Lilo 100%, and I thought she was incredibly charming. And then you have the character of Nani, who's another big piece here, and I really want to just go ahead and highlight really quickly that I love that majority of the cast is actually Hawaiian, but I also love the fact that they've got a bunch of actors in this film that were no names. There are some big names in the film, or some recognizable faces that have been in films for decades, but there are a lot of actors in this film I wasn't really familiar with, and Nani is one of them, who's played by Sydney Elizabeth Agudong, and I thought for the most part she really captured the spirit of Nani, this older sister who wants to care for her younger sister, who of course now is kind of like a daughter role to her. You know, their parents have died, and now she's trying to do everything she can to try to make this life easier for her sister, but her sister's not necessarily making it easy, and it only gets harder when this little alien creature named Stitch pops into the mix, or Experiment 626. And so, yeah, I want to start this off by saying that I think that in a lot of ways, this remake really captures and honors the tone and the spirit of what Lilo and Stitch is all about, which, like I already mentioned in the synopsis breakdown, is really about family. This is a film about healing. This is a film about family and belonging, and by the time you get to the end of the film, it would be hard to say that this film doesn't capture that. Now, I will say also immediately, as somebody who loves the original film and loves 2D animation, I don't necessarily know that this film hits the same levels of charm and endearing quality that that original film had, and this film does have some omissions that I didn't like, and some creative liberties that I didn't really like as well, but I will also praise the film for making some changes here that I did think actually worked in the film's favor. As far as returning cast members, Chris Sanders is the only one, but I do think it's worth mentioning that Carrere, who played Nani in the original film, does return in this film as a newer character, this time around being the social worker that has to come around and make sure that Lilo is being taken care of by Nani. So it's a new character in the mix. So overall, I think when you look at the overall spirit of the film, I am happy to say that I do think it really captured that. And I think that, you know, a lot of the side characters in the mix definitely helped elevate the material. Now, there were some things I had some gripes with, and that is specifically around two of the most iconic characters in the Lilo and Stitch franchise, and that is Jumba and Pleakley. Jumba this time around is played by Zach Galifianakis, and you also have Pleakley being played by Billy Magnuson. Now, I will say Billy, I thought, was pretty solid as Pleakley. He felt like Pleakley, and one thing that was frustrating, though, immediately, though, was that you don't have the cross-dressing, or the fact that you have these two clearly alien characters dressed in human attire trying to hide amongst the humans, which does give the original, you know, Lilo and Stitch storylines a lot of charm, whether it be the movies or the TV show. That's what they always did. From what I read and what I saw online, apparently the director tried to still push for that, and Disney said no. So unfortunately, no cross-dressing Pleakley in this film, which was a bit heartbreaking for me. But I do think Billy Magnuson does a good job in the role. Now, as for Jumba, Jumba is supposed to be this over-the-top evil scientist with a European accent of sorts and has a deeper voice. And so you kind of have this great duo of this very high-pitched, very eccentric character in Pleakley and this far more kind of deeper voiced, kind of more eccentric in a different direction, mad scientist character in Jumba. Zach Galifianakis was not the actor I would have chosen for this role. I don't think he really captured the spirit of Jumba, and it was easily one of my biggest letdowns when I was looking at the overall cast. You know, in terms of the other characters that are brought into the mix and have actors playing them in a way that feels like it follows the original film, unfortunately, I think Zach Galifianakis was the absolute biggest, most notable, and just completely distracting character in here that should have been recast. I don't think that he should have been that character. I think it was a complete miscast to have Zach Galifianakis as Jumba, and so I felt like that was worth mentioning. Another one that was disappointing to see, though I do think the actor who's in the film does a good job, is the character of Agent Bubbles, who this time around is played by Courtney B. Vance. In the original film, he was played by Ving Rhames, who really just looks the part, and from what I read online, apparently he was offered the part, but there were scheduling conflicts, which I'm so tired of hearing about scheduling conflicts for things that would have been perfect like this. I just feel like with the money and, you know, the amount of people that work for Disney, I feel like they could have found a workaround, to be honest. But either way, we got Courtney B. Vance in the role, and I think for the most part, he captures the spirit of Cobra Bubbles, but I don't know that his character is nearly as endearing or charming as he was in the original film, and I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that it doesn't feel like he's as utilized as he was in the previous film. And now one big omission that I cannot talk about Lilo and Stitch without mentioning is getting rid of Captain Gantu, who is essentially the main villain of the original film. He is the main one really searching after Stitch outside of Jumba and Pleakley, and the omission of this character, I don't know if it was like a CGI budget thing or they felt like they wanted to focus more on the family dynamic. I don't really know, but that was a huge disappointment for me. I feel like Captain Gantu should have been in this film, and as somebody who loves to see these remakes have some differences but also honor what the first film did a lot more than not, I was disappointed to see them not have Captain Gantu in this film. It was something I feel like I should mention. So I've talked about a little bit of some mixed bags things there, but what I do want to praise about this film is I do think it's a very beautifully shot film. Hawaii is a beautiful place. I think they were able to capture a lot of that. It was nice to have the authenticity of a lot of the cast members be Hawaiian and have the attire and the overall look and feel of it feel a Hawaiian and have music that was Hawaiian. One thing that was also a bit of a letdown was that there isn't as much of an Elvis presence in this film as there is in the original film, but there is some Elvis music at times. I don't really know why they chose to omit that element either, but it was not necessarily anything that ruined the film, but something that's at least noticeable for me. But when I look at what the film is really about, which is Lilo, Nani, and Stitch, I think that this film really captures that spirit of family. And I think that the camaraderie or the charm, the chemistry between Lilo and Stitch, the two title characters, are easily the part that I love the most about this film. It was where I found myself the most engaged in the story. It was where I found myself the most emotionally connected to the story. And it was the parts that I found myself most just completely glued to the screen for the most part. So I really do want to praise how they handled Lilo, Nani, that sister dynamic, that new parental guardian kind of relationship they have going on there, and how they handled Stitch. And again, I really think that bringing Chris Sanders back to play Stitch is going to make it a lot easier to kind of take on some of the changes they made for a lot of longtime Stitch fans. You know, I think had they changed the voice of Stitch, it would have been a little bit jarring, like what they did with Jumbo, where it just feels so different from the original character, from hours of content that we have of this character from the movies and TV show, that it's just like, why would you change Jumbo that much? And so I'm really glad that they kept Stitch feeling like Stitch by having Chris Sanders return, which again made it a little bit more palatable, made it a little bit easier to kind of digest any other changes. But outside of that, I really enjoyed the CGI as well. It strikes a good balance of cartoony, which you need for something like this. There's a lot of aliens in the film that you get to see, especially in the very beginning of the film, and with, of course, with Jumbo and Pleakley and Stitch. So I think they captured the overall aesthetic of these characters well, where they have a sense of realism to them, something that kind of brings them into that real world without completely making this film feel like it was trying to be grounded or serious. It feels cartoony, light, and fluffy like the original film did. And I think for the most part that they captured the overall tone of what you needed for those kind of characters in a film like this. And I think for the most part, this film really does capture that tone. It captures the spirit. It captures that family dynamic. And it had me feeling a little bit teary-eyed with Lilo and Stitch in the very end of the film, despite the fact that I've seen that original film a million times and I know how it ends. With all that said, I do want to say, like I've already mentioned, that I don't necessarily know that this film hits the same heights. There were elements about this film that did feel a little bit more just like a regurgitation, a reimagining of scenes you already know, just not as charming and not as beautiful. And I think part of that also is the fact that Lilo and Stitch is a very beautiful film. The animation for that time in the early 2000s for Disney, as they were kind of still in the later transition of having 2D animation, and of course somewhere in the next decade or so they would start to transition fully to 3D animation. This was in that point right after the Renaissance era of Disney animated films, where they were able to kind of dip their toes into a lot more beautiful, stunning 2D animation that was also utilizing some 3D animation as well. And I think that blend worked really well to give that original Lilo and Stitch a lot more charm, a lot more beauty. And you just didn't have that same level of memorable charm in this film. I feel like if I'm ever going to sit down to watch Lilo and Stitch, it's probably going to be the original film, but I do think that this film does a lot to, you know, connect itself and honor the legacy of the original film and be a fun new version for probably kids today who maybe haven't seen Lilo and Stitch before, or just for longtime fans of Lilo and Stitch who want to see the story done ever so slightly differently. One other thing I'll mention as far as an omission that really bothered me is one of my favorite scenes. It was one of the scenes I was waiting for the most in this movie, and that is the scene around Stitch being told about the story of the little duckling that was left behind. And I feel like that's a really important part of the original film. I love that scene of him going through the book on his own as he's trying to understand what it is to be a part of the family and feel alone. And this is really kind of what helps him realize he wants to be a part of this family dynamic with Lilo and Nani. And omitting that part was a bit of a frustrating element to me. Again, I think the film for the most part still captures the spirit. They do different things to get you to a similar place, but some of the scenes and some of the characters they chose to omit did definitely take away from the experience for me. But overall, I think that Lilo and Stitch 2025 is a far more positive experience than not. I was laughing throughout. I was engaged in the story. I had a lot of the nostalgic feelings. It was nice to see these versions of the characters and just see these characters in general brought to the big screen in a live action sense. It was nice to see some of the sci-fi elements brought to a live action CGI kind of way that was able to still be cartoony and fun and light, but also look cool and different. While I didn't love everything about this film, I ultimately found myself with far more positives than negative, and it's the kind of film I can see myself revisiting in the future. But it is the kind of film that immediately makes me want to watch the original because it is a substantially better version. So that's going to be my thoughts on Lilo and Stitch 2025. Are you planning on checking it out, or did you already check it out at an early screening? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.